about copyright / trademark briefly. And then I'll let y'all stretch your legs for like 5 minutes or whatever, and we'll dive into a very brief kind of like either our substitute on the topics. Okay, copyright is about, so whereas patents protect, whereas patents are about ensuring innovation, copyright is about protecting the expression of ideas. Copyright covers, like things like art, film, etc. And this is, as is kind of the core theme across this topic in general, here too, the goal is like balancing protection of the thing produced by the individual with ensuring that we kind of maximize the aggregate welfare of society as a whole. And as with patents, is built around the idea that like properly calibrating that balance is actually better for society as a whole than just leaving individuals unprotected. One example of a place where you can like see this incentive piece of this play is, you think about like, the music industry. The fact that you can't go along and just like outright copy someone else's songs is important for their ability to like make a living from those songs. That allows them to make more music. Then we get more music. That's good for us. There's obviously, as with patents, there's another element here that's like about kind of the like moral rights / natural rights piece. In copyright, and to some degree in trademark, which I'll talk about in a minute, we tend to care, like legal system tends to care more about that here than it does with patents. Like we talked about earlier, the US patent regime is manifestly non-Lockean and is very utilitarian. The copyright regime has some elements of that, but does care more than patents, than patent law does about like, you were an artist who painted this painting, we shouldn't let people just like alter the resultant painting willy-nilly because you like had a specific creative vision and created it intentionally. Let's see. What is worth covering? So I think for copyright, the main things to take away or like internalize at this moment, again, we can like dig more down the road into like what are particular laws or like court cases or whatever necessary, are number one, like I said, the like whereas patents cover innovation, this covers like expression of ideas. And number two, that again, like with IP in general, it is very much kind of a balancing act. One of the starter packet apps is in the copyright area. It is pretty in the weeds, and I think the decision we've arrived at is basically like different lab leaders are going to structure the curriculum a little differently. Some of y'all will interact with it later. Some might interact with it earlier, whatever. That's like up to your lab leaders. I do think that we'll probably do a lecture on that at some point. We'll figure out how to structure that. But anyway, do folks have any burning questions about copyright law based on your own prior knowledge or like something you've read or seen or whatever you didn't understand that I can address now? If not, then I'll like give a few examples of potential copyright apps when we get to the topic area, but I think that'll be like more efficient than doing a full deep dive. Yeah.
Just question is like, how is the boundary between parody and copying defined?
Between parody, oh, like P-A-R-O-D-Y?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know enough about the details of this to be able to get super deep into the weeds on how the, like for example, in the music context, what counts as like parody thing and what doesn't. What that does highlight that I meant to talk about that I didn't is the concept of fair use in general, which includes parody, but also includes limited use for educational purposes and stuff like that. In line with the same idea, again, like trying to calibrate all of this to maximize societal well-being. We don't, like, copyright does not, like, copyright, while exclusive, does have kind of caveats and exceptions, the biggest of which is that there are ways in which one can use a copyrighted work and be protected, right? Like, I write a book, I copyright that book. you can still teach a class using that hook. You do not need to pay me in order for you to be able to do that. That's an example of like an educational fair use of the thing. Parody, which I was just asked about, is another example of that. Like, there are limits on how far you can go with this, but like Weird Al, for example, right? Like somebody whose entire music career was built around taking a song and producing his own version of that song that is like very clearly a comedic send-up of the original. That's allowed, even though the melodies and stuff he's using are cribbed directly from the original. Whereas if he were not very clearly parodying the thing, it would not be allowed. One of the places that people can get into trouble with some of that is, to continue with the music example, something like sampling. If the snippets you're using are short enough and are properly credited and stuff, then in a lot of cases you're fine. Certainly if you get prior approval or permission from the person, you're fine. If instead it's like, I'm sampling this melody or this beat or whatever, then it's like very distinctive and it isn't sufficiently distinct to be like clearly a whole new separate work, then that can get you into trouble. So yeah, I know that doesn't actually answer your question, but I'm glad you asked the question. That's good. Anyone else? Okay, trademarks. The purpose of trademarks is to protect, so trademarks govern the operation of a given product in the marketplace. And the purpose of these in like our kind of IP system is sort of twofold. One is consumer protection. The other is a company's own interests in having its brand be understood and identified as distinct. I think it's easiest to think to understand like what counts as a trademark and what doesn't in the context of like specific examples. And also this can sort of change over time depending on like people's language and usage of that language. But so like for example, like tissue paper or whatever, like tissues are like a generic non-trademarkable thing, right? Kleenex is a trademark. There are a number of contexts. I don't know whether Kleenex is ended up falling into this category or not, but I know things like Band-Aids and stuff have, where the thing originates as its own kind of distinct trademark because people associate it just with that particular company. But then over time, it becomes known as, like, someone's like, hey, can you grab me a Kleenex? And like, they don't mean that particular brand. They mean this as a concept. And once you get into that territory, if it's a trademark of yours, you run the risk of losing that trademark because it's no longer understood as like distinctively identifying you. Okay. The reason for that is because, like we said a minute ago, the two goals that we're trying to serve here are consumer protection and like brand identity / distinctiveness for the consumer.